Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 2 Earth, Episode 1, The Avatar State. So we're starting Book 2 here. And yeah, we start off with this DR movie animated episode, The Avatar State, which I think is a very good episode. I think immediately you see, I think immediately a slight difference immediately compared to Book 1 because just the amount of interesting reveals that happen here immediately, just new villain in Azula properly presented to us here. She has a new and interesting power of lightning generation. The main teases within the entire show of Ozai and Iroh's relationship, I think, plus just all those interesting angles of just Iroh and Azula, Azula and Zuko, and just the general relationship between all those kind of family members. Then in the other side of the story, you obviously have exploration of the Avatar state in more detail, revealing where Aang is actually planning to go in terms of his earthbending training. And then, most interestingly of all here, I think, one of the few times where we really see that even the good guy side of the war, the Earth Kingdom in this case, is willing to do some kind of morally wrong things to get an advantage in the war in terms of using Aang in the way that General Fong wants to use him here. So just a lot of really big things immediately, that it's not a random episode like in Book 1. We are straight away kind of getting into we're not too focused on they're slowing things down. Have we forgotten about that we have to do things quickly? No, immediately they're trying to get ahead with, oh, Aang's going to go to the Earth Kingdom to learn earthbending from King Bumi. But what about this kind of way to immediately fight Ozai straight away? We'll just use the Avatar state and immediately attack Ozai. That's straight away to the point and what we want. So no problems there whatsoever. Yeah, we'll get into, I suppose, the first bit, which is Aang being afraid of the Avatar state. So they set this up pretty nicely over the course of the episode, that Aang is very kind of almost terrified of kind of what he did while he wasn't really aware of what he was doing in the Avatar state. That he clearly has dreams of what he did, but isn't aware of the full context of what exactly he's done. And it links into, I think, the scene with Katara later on, where she gives him basically the outside perspective as someone who cares about him kind of outside of the whole Avatar state thing, of just what it looked like to her, seeing him in this kind of kill mode, basically. In that, for her, I don't know, she says, a nice line that you can interpret a few different ways, but for the people who love you, it was scary seeing you like that. And Aang appreciating her saying that to him, but kind of being guilt tripped in this episode into having to go ahead with this kind of crazy plan of General Fong's, which I think that makes him a somewhat interesting character, in that he obviously comes from the perspective of he cares about his men, and the war has gone on long enough that he's seen enough soldiers die in the war that he doesn't want that to happen. That when Team Avatar comes in and say that no, Aang has to do all this training before he can finally win, the people who are kind of buying him the time for that to happen are the forces of the Earth Kingdom, of the Water Tribe. And should they wait that long for Aang to do his training, when it may not be the best way to activate it in terms of Aang for Aang personally or mentally, but it is a power that he possesses, and it could win the war and stop a lot of death and bloodshed from happening. So I think it's a fascinating angle that they perhaps didn't play into enough, maybe, going forward, in that it's really confined to this one episode for the most part, and then they kind of bring up the same angle again going into the finale of just, you haven't thought about this, Aang, but are you actually going to kill Ozai when it comes down to it? Did you really think that it would just be a simple thing to just win the fight against Ozai, but win it in a way where you can then capture him and keep him from hurting other people. Um, just speaking to the complexities of war in this situation, and that it's the the conflict here is presented as fairly, black and white. The Fire Nation are the ones that are at fault, and no one's arguing that the Fire Nation military need to be defeated for things to go back to peace. But this presents the idea of like, but how far are the good guys willing to go to achieve that peace? Are they willing to kind of morally kind of give up themselves to make that happen? And so just this kind of disregard for Aang's personal views on the Avatar state, and kind of using a power he has, using him for what he is rather than who he is, over everything else, is an interesting angle. And you can understand why Katara initially is very defensive of this and doesn't want Aang to go ahead. And really, Aang is guilt-tripped into doing it by like, oh look, here's all these injured people over here, and you're just wasting our time by doing all this training. And it leads to eventually, of course, Fong being revealed to be clearly, I think, so affected by war that he kind of just doesn't have any time for stuff not going his way, and so he is crazy now enough to the point where he's willing to actually, go after Aang, hurt him, to force the Avatar state to happen. And I think it's a really good scene when it finally happens in terms of how he did it. It was nothing about Aang being put in danger in the fight, because I think it showed how skilled Aang is as a bender, that he was able to, for the most part, avoid a whole like battalion of Earth Kingdom soldiers, including a very powerful General Fong here, and not have the Avatar state trigger, or not being put in a situation where he just lost the fight. That spoke to how skilled of a bender he is. But what really activated the Avatar state was someone he cared about, in this case loves, basically, being put in a dangerous situation more so than himself being put in a dangerous situation. And this is the kind of a beginning of this arc of course, you look at the bookmarks of Book 2. We start with the Avatar state explanation, we end with, does Aang have the Avatar state or not? And is he willing to put aside his weakness as a character, that being kind of almost caring too much about the people he cares about, to get this power of the Avatar state? Yet in this episode we see that it's kind of, the defense mechanism of the Avatar state is triggered by someone he cares about being put in danger. And it's just really nice the way that connection works, and how they pretty much over the course of the whole season more or less build towards this. And yeah, immediately like Fong just doesn't realize that if he does this to Aang, the Avatar state will be directed at him, not the Fire Lord, because Fong is the one who affected Aang to make this happen. And obviously it's another situation where it links back into Aang's nightmares at the start of, here's another situation where he's going to find out about later on, and all these other people he's hurt now doing this, and it's none of it really Aang's fault. It's all Fong's fault that he's got even more of his men injured. And it's just, again, just the harshness of war, that these kind of crazy plans are actually put into action. But yeah, this is where Roku obviously kind of pulls Aang out and kind of takes over a little bit. And we get the big reveal here that, okay, the Avatar state we've known for a bit is kind of the really powerful version of the Avatar state. It's effectively, the other avatars taking over Aang's body. But it's explained here that effectively what the glow is, it is kind of like the power, the energy, the experience of all of the past avatars together as one, channeled through one person. And it's the time when the avatar is the most powerful, but also the most vulnerable, because if you're killed in the Avatar state somehow, it ends the Avatar cycle. Now, we don't get explained to us the mechanics of how this exactly happens, why just you being killed in a very powerful state ends the cycle, but obviously with the reveal in Korra that what the Avatar state is, or the Avatar spirit is, it's Rava. The idea being that in the Avatar state, it's the point at which the human and spirit are kind of like one, because the Avatar can only channel that much energy through them by basically using the energy properties of Rava. So when the human is hit and killed in the Avatar state, it means that the spirit also takes damage, and effectively are, that's the point at which they're most combined. so when the human dies, it breaks the connection, and obviously how the connection was formed in the first place can't just happen again without harmonic convergence. So it all is explained later on in Korra why this statement is the truth from Roku. But a really interesting angle that it creates this idea of like, this is why going forward Aang can't just win every fight with the Avatar state. Because yes, it's super powerful, but it's also not Aang in control. It's very focused on power attacks, and if by any chance Aang is hit, it ends the Avatar state, and because of that, it effectively ends the good guys' chances in the war. So they kind of need this, and it kind of presents, of course, the idea that is there any way to actually control the Avatar state, which comes into play much later on in the season, which is really interesting. And that I do find it a little weird that Roku didn't really go into like explaining that, like, oh, but you can actually learn to channel it to some degree, where like you turn it on for a second to get a burst of power and use it, which is effectively what Aang is training to do by the end of this season. So that's that, and you know, you get the funny moment at the end where like Fong gets up and wants to immediately try again, but like direct Aang at the Fire Nation, and Sokka just knocks him out and is just like, you know, the guys under his command, any problem with this? And they're like, nope, and they just kind of go away on their own off to Omashu, of course. Then on the other side of the store we have Zuko and Iroh plus Azula. And it's the 3-year anniversary of Zuko's banishment, which is an interesting reveal here, because Zuko's at this point now where, you know, he doesn't really know where to go. He has no idea where Aang is. He has obviously no crew under his command. It's just him and his uncle. And can he even do this anymore is the question at this point. And then Azula is forced into play here to kind of come after him, so everything's going wrong for Zuko. As for the introduction of Azula herself, I think it's really well done, because you see how commanding, scary, manipulative, especially Azula is. She has this kind of perfect relationship with power, where like she is a absolutely kind of born to be a leader in a way. In terms of this kind of side of things, you know, the leader of this, you know, kind of villain leader. She was kind of meant to be this. That's her character, and just the whole do the tides command this ship scene, that really speaks to kind of her strength as a character. And I suppose who thought her all of this, Ozai, who later on turns out to be a very good manipulator himself. So you understand where he gets it from, whereas Zuko doesn't really have any of this in him. He's not a manipulator. He's very open with what he's trying to do, not kind of, you know, subtly manipulating people to get what he wants and so on. And yeah, we get the reveal that Azula can generate lightning, which was obviously a big tease in a couple of the episodes last season, of just that, you know, Iroh can, you know, seemingly redirect lightning and do all this sort of stuff. But here is the kind of idea that no, you can actually, it is a bending ability where it can be generated, and Azula has effectively perfected the technique here. Lo and Lee say, you know, just a hair out of place, and you can see that as part of her character that she strives for perfection and is annoyed at herself, even though she's amazing at lightning generation. But that hair out of place really annoys her, and she doesn't see it as perfect at all. And you get the sense that she expects that much perfection from everyone in every aspect of her life. So yeah, and then I suppose her meeting Iroh and Zuko is another situation of just her calling him Zuzu, and him not liking that. Clearly she knew that would annoy him. And then immediately you know that she's a villain, and you know she's lying when she says, you know, Ozai's had a change of heart, father wants you back, he realizes how important family is. And Zuko buys it completely, because that's what he wants to believe. That's what he wants to believe Ozai is, and he has this view of Ozai that he is this person who has a reasonable side, that because he sent him out on this journey, like capture the Avatar and I'll welcome you back, he doesn't realize that effectively that was just a way of, like, to some degree coming across as fair to others, giving Zuko like this opportunity where, like, if you do this, I'll welcome you back. But Ozai never expected Zuko to ever actually bring Aang back to him. So it was meant to just be a permanent banishment, a way to be rid of Zuko effectively. And I think what's really interesting here is that Iroh immediately doesn't believe Ozai and kind of talks that, like, my brother would never regret anything. He would never change his mind like this. You need to be cautious about this. And Zuko snaps back and is just like, no, you're just jealous of him. And you're just kind of an old man who's always been jealous of his brother. And I find that an interesting line because clearly to some degree it's informed by some experience that Zuko has had where he's maybe seen Iroh and Ozai interact, or he's heard a lot more about Ozai from Iroh, or vice versa. Maybe he's basing that on stuff that Ozai has said about Iroh. But it brings up this like baffling thing within the series of just like it's this fascinating dynamic. Iroh, Ozai, like they're the main villain of the series, and then probably a lot of people's favorite character. They've never interacted once in the story. Not in the show, not in the comics. And there's so much implied, like, issues between them that we just don't get any details really on what their dynamic is. And the closest really they've ever come to being, like, in any way within the same scene is the scene where, in the storm, where Ozai burns Zuko. Iroh's obviously there watching. But they're not interacting as such. So it's a very, very interesting kind of dynamic, and I don't get why it was just never covered. I feel like for Ozai as a character, you almost needed to give the context of like maybe the relationship with Iroh, because Iroh was the firstborn and Ozai wasn't, was important enough that like that gives context to why like Ozai is as cruel as he is or something like that. Because clearly like they kind of, the way they kind of go on is just like that, oh maybe Iroh was so open-minded about things he didn't fit in the Fire Nation. But like as we get Iroh's backstory kind of filled out to a degree, like Azula seemed to have great respect for Iroh, and obviously the whole thing with Zuko, what happens that leads to Ursa's banishment, fundamentally comes because Azula punishes Ozai for trying to take advantage of the death of Liu Ten, and basically punishing Ozai for not being like kind of compassionate towards Iroh in this situation. So clearly it is an Ozai issue that's at play here, rather than Iroh really being at fault for everything. But again, we don't know kind of early Iroh enough to really state that with confidence. But the result of this ends up being that, Iroh and Zuko do plan to go with Azula back to the Fire Nation and be accepted back by Ozai, but one of the guards makes a mistake, calls them prisoners, and the fight is on. Iroh takes on all the guards, Zuko and Azula have their first fight, and it's really clear that Azula has the skill advantage over Zuko. As much as we've seen Zuko develop, and that like Zuko's a better fighter than Zhao and so on, and he can be a match for Aang, Azula just seems better than Zuko, and that's really interesting. And she nearly takes him out with lightning here, and Iroh again reveals his lightning redirection, and obviously slams Azula into the water. So establishing that Iroh is one of the most powerful characters in the show. He just never shows it all that much. But the result here ends up being that Iroh and Zuko are on the run. They cut off their top knots as this kind of symbolic, separation from the Fire Nation royal family, which is, I think, a very important, like, subtle kind of context to give of just, like, as much as they were technically banished in the first book, it was still under the impression that, like, they had an opportunity to come back. Now it's revealed that, Ozai, basically does not want them back, and they are basically fugitives from the Fire Nation, and now can't go around basically saying we're Fire Nation royalty. They have to go undercover, and that is very, very interesting. It's just a further, this is Zuko at his absolute lowest point. He now has nothing, is on the run, and now he knows that he's not wanted, and that capturing the Avatar doesn't really mean anything. But I suppose for Zuko at this point in time, in the back of his head, he still has that idea of like, but if I do capture Aang, it has to mean something. surely my father will let me come back if I give him Aang. Not obviously, like, you know, to some degree, I suppose Ozai would try to manipulate the situation and accept it, which is kind of what happens. But you know, just that Zuko, even though he should really treat this scene as just my father doesn't care about me. He doesn't really see it in that way as such, and is obviously, when Azula kind of comes back into play towards the end of the season, very open again to the return, you know, teaming up with her. So very, very interesting stuff overall. And just really good episode to start the season, presenting our new villain, presenting this dynamic of, like, Azula is going to try and obviously capture Aang when she comes across him, but also she's trying to capture her brother and Iroh as well. So they're on the run as well. Then, you know, the question of, like, will Zuko get an opportunity to capture Aang again? How will that go? Will the potential setup of a Zuko-Aang friendship alliance come back into play? Plus the Avatar state thing being a big issue. You know, he's going to learn earthbending from Boomy is what they've set up in this episode. There's a lot here that makes it a really good episode. One of the absolute best of the series? Perhaps not. But I think it's there and thereabouts, just because of the importance of the new reveals and information that's given here. But yeah, that's been the review for 201, the Avatar State. In the comments to let me know what your thoughts were on the episode and what I had to say here. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.